Hi everyone, I'm Cassie. I hope you had a great week. So today we're going to be finishing up the Boxcar Children, the Mystery Bookstore. If you haven't already listened to part 1 and part 2, go back and listen to those on my channel, and then come and listen to the final chapters that wraps up the book. So let's go ahead and get started. Chapter 8, The Alden Set a Trap. Suspect or not, Mr. Bendry was still his grumpy old self when he reappeared an hour later. "Can we help you carry those heavy books?" Henry asked. Said Mr. Bendry's answer. "These are my price guides, and I can carry them myself." "Did you have to go back home to get your guides after I saw you before?" Jessie asked. "What business is that of yours, young lady?" Mr. Bendry said sharply. "Now let me get on with my job." Mr. Bendry went off to the far end of the courtyard, as far as he could get from the Aldens. "I'm going to follow Mr. Bendry so he doesn't get away again," Benny announced. He headed into the bookshop and came out carrying a feather duster. Slowly he made his way across the courtyard, dusting the book tables high and low. Very soon he was where he wanted to be, right by Mr. Bendry. "These books don't need dusting," Mr. Bendry told Benny. Benny just kept right on with his feather dusting. He was going to track Mr. Bendry no matter what. If the man had Violet's books, Benny was going to do his best to find them. A few minutes later, Violet came over too. When Mr. Bendry saw Violet, he buried his nose in a book. "How do you decide what to charge for a book?" Violet asked to break the silence. "Because I know what I'm doing," Mr. Bendry muttered without looking up from his price guide. "I've made some of my own books," Violet said shyly. "Would you like to see some of them?" Mr. Bendry looked up over the top of his glasses. "If I take a look, will you and this boy let me work in peace? I trip over him every time I turn around." "Sorry," Benny apologized, even though he hadn't come quite that close. Violet reached into her tote bag. She pulled out a pretty fabric-covered book. "I made this scrapbook. Would you like to see it?" Mr. Bendry pushed his glasses to get a better look. He said. He slowly turned the pages to see how she had mounted some of her photos and souvenirs. Mr. Bendry handed Violet back her book. "I've got to get to work, little girl. Now take your book away and your brother as well." "I made a book too," Benny announced. "It's a flip book of a monkey climbing a banana tree." He reached into Violet's tote bag. "Want to see it?" "The only books I have time for are Miss Chase's," Mr. Bendry barked at the children. "That's the job she hired me to do." Benny and Violet looked at each other. It was time. "How did you hear about this job?" Violet asked, a little nervous what the answer might be. Mr. Bendry ignored the question and didn't look up from his guide. "The job," Violet repeated. "How did you hear about it?" "There was an ad in the paper for anybody to see," Mr. Bendry said gruffly. "Now would you two run along and leave me be? I can't do what I was hired to do with kids running around touching everything." Violet took Benny by the hand. "Making friends with Mr. Bendry isn't going to be easy," she said after they left the old man. "But it's the only way we'll ever find out anything. Mr. Bendry didn't lie exactly. He was right. The job was in the newspaper just as he said." "But he showed up before it was in the paper," Benny said, "so it's kind of a lie." "I know," Violet said quietly. "We'll just have to get to know Mr. Bendry better so we can find out why he isn't telling the truth." "Did you have any luck with Mr. Bendry?" Jessie asked when Violet and Benny returned to the bookshop. "Miss Chase says she'll try to talk to him later while they're working together. She wants to know why he showed up for the job before it was in the paper." "We tried, but he didn't say anything," Violet said. "We'll just have to keep trying," Jessie said. "Meantime, this bookshop is still a regular dust bowl. I'm just sweeping up, Benny. Can you grab that dustpan and help me out?" While Jessie swept, Benny held out the dustpan, but working didn't keep him from talking a mile a minute. Today, nothing but Mr. Bendry and Violet's missing books were on his mind. "First, he got his book guides, Jessie. Then he tried to go far away from us, but I didn't let him. I just kept dusting right near him the whole time. He wouldn't look at my monkey book, though." Jessie smiled down at Benny. "Well, I love your monkey flip book. Did you and Violet get a chance to ask about the 3 missing fairy tales?" "No way," Benny said. "He didn't want us around. Violet said we should try to make friends little by little, but then ask about her books." "Not a bad idea, Benny," Jessie said as she swept near the brick wall of the bookshop. "I can't believe I have to sweep here again. These bricks keep crumbling all over no matter how much I dust and sweep." "Hey," Benny said, taking a closer look at the wall. Maybe there's a mouse hole, and that's why the pieces keep falling on the floor. Benny felt some of the bricks to see if they jiggled. Hey, here's a loose one. Watch it, Benny, Jessie said, but it was too late. Several loose chunks of brick tumbled down after Benny pulled out one of the bricks. Benny didn't care one bit about the mess he was making. I bet a mouse really does live in there, he said. He stood on tiptoe and tried to see inside the empty space. Can I stick my hand in? Be careful, Jessie warned. Benny reached into the dark hole and felt around. Somebody just stuffed paper and rags in here to keep out the cold. He pulled out some bunched up yellow newspapers and rags. Then he tossed the papers into a can Henry was getting ready to put at the curb for recycling. The Aldens went back to work. Soon the workshop was clean. A couple of coats of paint, some new books, and the mystery bookstore will be ready for business, Henry said. I'll take this can out to the sidewalk for pickup. Just as Henry got to the front door, the shop had opened. Is Miss Chase here? Rex Phillips asked Henry. I need to talk to her right away. She had to meet with somebody about ordering books for her bookstore, Jessie answered. Can we help? I doubt it, Mr. Phillips shifted from one foot to the other. Look, you kids tell her I'm going to offer her a good price for all those books out in the courtyard. She can cancel the sale tomorrow. Have her call me right away. We'll give her the message, Henry said, but I don't think she'll cancel the sale after all this work. Everybody's looking forward to it. Not everybody, Mr. Phillips said under his breath. He reached for the door, but Benny was in the way. I need to get by, Mr. Phillips said. But when he moved sideways, Benny moved sideways too. He kept right on sweeping invisible dirt into the dustpan as if he didn't even see Mr. Phillips. Benny had Mr. Phillips trapped between the counter and the door. Right away, Jessie figured out what to do. She took Violet's scrapbook and spread out the children's sightseeing pictures. Would you like to take a look at our photos of New Orleans? Mr. Phillips' face almost turned purple. I'm a businessman. I haven't got time to look at a bunch of children's vacation pictures. Now, would you move out of my way, little boy? In a minute, Benny said, not budging at all. There's a lot of dust balls down here. Dust balls, Mr. Phillips yelled. I haven't got time for dust balls either. Did you know you were in our pictures? Violet asked. Look, here you are behind me and Benny in the cafe. Then down at the docks and a few other places too. That's you, isn't it? Nonsense, Mr. Phillips said. I was in Lafayette yesterday at a stamp show. With that, Mr. Phillips practically jumped over Benny and stormed out. He didn't like our pictures too much, Henry said. Jessie gathered up her photos. Maybe he was at a stamp show yesterday, but he was also in Jackson Square and at the docks and lots of other places right here in New Orleans. I'm sure of that. I have to go out to put this recycling can at the curb, Henry said. I'll follow Mr. Phillips for a while, the way we planned. The other Aldens went over to the bookshop window to watch Henry watch Mr. Phillips. Hey, Benny cried. Why is Henry reading one of those old newspapers instead of staying behind Mr. Phillips? Let's find out, Jessie said. Henry seemed to have forgotten all about Mr. Phillips. Instead, he was reading an old wrinkled newspaper that was practically falling apart. Why aren't you shadowing Mr. Phillips? Benny asked. Henry handed Jessie the newspaper. Never mind Mr. Phillips right now. Just take a look at this. It's one of those old newspapers you poured out from behind that brick wall, Benny. It caught my eye when I put down the can. Read what it says under this picture. The Alden squinted at a faded picture of a smiling middle-aged woman. She was holding a little album of some kind with a small rectangular stamp in the middle. Jessie began to read. Local resident Mabel Post holds up a rare Costa Rican stamp showing a reversed flag. Miss Post, owner of the Old Treasures Bookshop, found the album in a $1 box of children's books she bought at a local yard sale. She would not discuss what she planned to do with the valuable stamp. Benny was puzzled. What does that mean? How come if a stamp is reversed, it's worth more than one that's the right way? Henry, who knew a little about stamp collecting, had heard about the famous backwards flag stamp. Because when the post office found the mistake, it stopped printing the wrong ones. I think they only printed a sheet of 100 stamps of the backwards flag, so each stamp is worth a lot. I wonder what happened to this one, Violet said. Miss Chase and Mrs. Post could hardly keep her shop going. Wouldn't she have been rich if she had sold the stamp? Chapter 9, Some Very Old News. That afternoon, Benny looked for Miss Chase from the parlor window. Finally, very late in the day, she came around the corner. Benny flew downstairs to the courtyard and out to the street. Goodness, I didn't know we were expecting Hurricane Benny, Miss Chase said with a laugh. What's up? Watching the bookshop get painted can't be that exciting. This is what's exciting. Benny handed Miss Chase the old newspaper with Mabel Post's picture. Phew, you're going awfully fast for me, Benny, Miss Chase said. Let's go upstairs so I can get my reading glasses. Then I can see what you have here. It's about Mrs. Post buying a stamp with a flag that's the wrong way. And Henry said wrong way stamps are worth lots more than right way ones. I haven't a clue what you're talking about, Miss Chase said. And Rex Phillips has been bothering me all day. He tracked me down to the office where I was meeting with some book people and waited for me until I came out. I only got rid of him by telling him that we have our book sale tomorrow, rain or shine. Oops, I almost forgot, Benny said. He told us to tell you he wanted to buy all the books all by himself and not have the book sale. But Henry said no way. And know what else? Miss Chase laughed again. Know what? He said he wasn't in our pictures and that he went to a stamp show. By this time, Benny and Miss Chase were back in the apartment with the other Aldens. Miss Chase rummaged in her purse for her other reading glasses. Then she took a good long look at the old newspaper Benny handed her and read the headline. Floodwaters, damage historic French Quarter. No, not that side. Jessie flipped over the page so Miss Chase could see Mabel Post's picture. This side. My goodness, doesn't Mabel look young here? Miss Chase said. This is way before I moved to New Orleans, of course. Ah, yes. I'd heard these stories about her buying a valuable stamp and a box of old books at a yard sale. But Mabel never admitted to it, and I never bothered to track down the story. Now I see why people didn't really remember the facts too well. Why's that, Miss Chase? Henry asked. Miss Chase flipped over the newspaper page. Mabel's picture appeared on the same day as a terrible flood here in New Orleans. We get many of them during hurricane season. The day Mrs. Post's picture was in the paper was one of the worst floods ever. No wonder people don't remember about the stamp. Did Mrs. Post ever mention the backwards flag stamp to you? Jessie asked. Miss Chase thought a bit. Not really. Sometimes when Rex came around, she'd joke about having lots of valuable stamps hidden away, but she always wound up telling Rex that stamp collecting was just child's play, or that stories about her having a valuable stamp were nothing but fairy tales. Of course, this upset Rex to no end. Pretty soon he tried to get something out of her, but as far as I know, he never had a bit of luck. Speaking of luck, we didn't have any luck finding the missing books, Violet said. It's just the oddest thing, the way those books just disappeared off the sleeping porch, Jessie said. I bet Mr. Bendry had something to do with it. He was in the courtyard this morning. And after that, he shooed me and Violet away, Benny complained. Anyhow, at least I found this boring old newspaper in the mouse hole. Miss Chase patted Benny's hand. Now, Benny, a good detective like you knows that a clue doesn't have to look exciting to be exciting. This got Benny thinking. He picked up the old newspaper and went over to the mirror with it. Holding it up, he said, Now the stamp doesn't look backwards. It looks like a regular old stamp. But everything else in the picture looks backwards. Then he put the newspaper on the table and ran over to Miss Chase's desk. Can I borrow the magnifying glass? Sure, Miss Chase answered. Do you want a better look at the stamp? Not the stamp, Benny cried. He slid the newspaper under the light over the kitchen table. What do you see? Violet asked when she looked over Benny's shoulder. Oh my gosh! Look what else is in the picture. Mrs. Post is holding the box set of fairy tales on her lap with one hand and the stamp album with the other. Now everyone crowded around to see what Benny and Violet were hollering about. You're quite right, children, Miss Chase said when she got a good look at the photo, too. Mabel Post has her other hand resting right on the Little Mermaid. Chapter 10, Benny and Violet Hide Out. By 7 o'clock on Saturday morning, the sun was up. It was a perfect day for an outdoor book sale. In just a couple hours, the mystery bookstore would be ready for its first customers. It's almost your last day in New Orleans, so I don't want to work you children too hard, Miss Chase said as she enjoyed a cup of her favorite chicory coffee. You've all done so much already. Now that your grandfather is back, he's offered to take over some of the work so you children can do some last-minute sightseeing. Mr. Alden put down his coffee cup. If I know my grandchildren, I have a feeling they'd rather be at the bookstore sale than go sightseeing, Olivia. That's right, Grandfather, Benny agreed. We're going sightseeing right here. Today's the day we find the rest of Violet's set, and maybe that funny backward stamp, too. Mr. Alden laughed. You'd better bring me up to date on all your plans, Benny. Violet and I thought up everything last night, Benny said. We're going to hide under the children's book table and listen to who snoops around too much. I see, Mr. Alden said. And who might be snooping about? Benny took a deep breath. Well, first there's Mr. Bendry. He came for the job before it was in the newspaper. Don't forget Sarah Deckel, Henry reminded everyone. She always shows up at odd times. Her too, Benny said. And Mr. Phillips, 'cause he likes stamps, and the backward stamp is missing. If anybody else gets too snoopy, we're going to watch them too. You're going to be very busy, Mr. Alden remarked. And you know what else, Benny asked? We tied one end of a spool of thread to the Little Mermaid. You can hardly see it. If anybody tries to take it away, we'll be able to tell. Just don't sell it by mistake, Miss Chase reminded the children. Oh, we won't, Violet said. It's almost 9 o'clock, Miss Chase said. Now I want you children to have some fun today and not work too hard. Promise? Promise, Jessie said, but work is fun for us. Working at the book sale was fun for the Aldens, just as Jessie said. Since they loved reading mysteries and solving them, Jessie and Henry decided to work at the mystery table. People sure get up early when there's a sale, Henry said, after he let the first customers into the courtyard. We're going to be very busy. So are we, Violet giggled from under the children's table nearby. All I can see are feet, Benny. Jessie said she'd tap on the top of the table if one of our suspects comes in. Violet and Benny didn't have to wait long. One tap, Benny whispered to Violet when they heard Jessie rap the table once. That means Mr. Bendry's coming over. Do you have the spool end of the thread? I'm holding it. Violet tugged the thread gently from under the table. Good morning, Mr. Bendry, the younger children overheard Jessie say only a couple feet away. Can I help you with anything this morning? Mr. Bendry said before moving over to the children's table. Violet and Benny could hardly sit still when they saw Mr. Bendry's shoes just inches away from where they were hiding. Violet held tight to the thread. Then the children heard another pair of feet march over to the children's table. Jessie tapped the table twice. It's Sarah Deckel, Benny whispered. Violet felt a tug on the thread. What are you doing with that book, miss? Mr. Bendry asked. I was about to buy it. Well, I picked it up first, Sarah Deckel answered. Benny and Violet heard more footsteps. Then they saw a familiar pair of white and black sneakers. It's Henry, Benny whispered. Sorry, folks, Henry said. This book isn't for sale. It belongs to my sister. The rest of the set is missing, and we're hoping someone will come by who knows about the set it belongs to. Violet and Benny saw Sarah Deckel kick her toe at the ground. Well, maybe your sister would like to sell it. I'll pay $100 just for this book. Before Henry could answer, Mr. Bendry had some angry words for Miss Deckel. $100? What do you know about books anyway? This volume may be part of a limited edition set illustrated by Arthur Plumbrush, a famous painter. They were the only books he ever illustrated. The first printing completely sold out long ago, and the original art was destroyed in a fire, so the books could never be reprinted. A complete set would be nearly priceless. But Mr. Bendry, you told Violet her book wasn't worth much, Henry said. Don't you remember? What I remember is saying children and old books don't mix, Mr. Bendry snapped. I'm going to check with Olivia to see why this book is just lying around in the first place. Sarah Deckel looked as upset as Mr. Bendry. Yes, do that, she said. I'll be right here until you get back. After Mr. Bendry left with Henry, the book sale got crowded. Benny and Violet could see many pairs of feet surrounding the book tables. Sarah Deckel's feet, though, never moved. A few minutes later, the younger children heard a familiar voice talking to Jessie. Hello, young lady. I came to buy a signed copy of The Streetcar Mystery, Mr. Phillips said to Jessie. But I see there are none left. Can you check with Miss Chase if she has any more copies inside the shop? Maybe, Jessie said, but I really can't leave until my brother Henry returns. He'll be back any second. I'll wait here, Mr. Phillips said. You see, I'm in a bit of a rush today, and I'd like to get the signed copy. If you could, just get Miss Chase to sign a book. I can be on my way. Well, okay, Jessie agreed. Oops, I have to tie my shoe. When Jessie bent down, she whispered to Benny and Violet, I have to run into the shop for another book. Just make sure to hold on to that thread. Now Mr. Phillips and Sarah Deckel are here. I'll be right back. As soon as Jessie was gone, Benny and Violet heard Rex Phillips talking in a low voice to Sarah Deckel. This time he didn't sound so polite. Drop the book into my briefcase. Quick, before those two nosy kids get back. Did you find the rest of the set and department this morning? No, Sarah Deckel whispered. But if we're lucky, maybe the stamp is in this one. We can look for the rest of the set later when all these kids are busy working. Open your briefcase slowly and I'll slip the book in. Violet and Benny could hardly sit still in their hideout. Miss Deckel and Mr. Phillips were going to steal Violet's book together. The children felt the thread pull, so Violet let out the spool. Good, Mr. Phillips said in a low voice. Now let's get out of here before anyone comes back and figures out the book is missing. Violet broke the thread so Mr. Phillips wouldn't notice it was attached to the book. She grabbed Minnie's hand. Here's what we do. I'll sneak over to the courtyard door and close it so they can't get out that way. You go to the bookshop and tell Miss Chase what happened, okay? After Benny ran off, Violet didn't have to wait long for her two suspects. Excuse me, we have to leave, Mr. Phillips tried to get by Violet. Just open the door. I'm sorry, I can't do that, Violet said. Everybody has to go out through the bookshop. Sarah Deckel's face got red. Rex, you've got a key. Open up. Rex reached into his pocket and pulled out the same keychain Violet had seen him drop a few days earlier. Move out of the way, he said to Violet. Violet didn't move. Sarah Deckel looked panicked. All right, let's just get out through the bookstore. Rex Phillips didn't need to be coaxed. He and Sarah elbowed their way through the crowd of customers until they were in the bookstore. It's too late, Sarah Deckel said when she saw the Aldens, Mr. Bendry, and Miss Chase blocking their way. Stop right there, Rex, Miss Chase said. I need to check your briefcase before you leave. We have reason to suspect you've taken a book. She pointed to a sign above the cash register that said, We reserve the right to inspect belongings. Shoplifters will be prosecuted to the full extent of the law. Mr. Phillips had no choice. There seemed to be Aldens everywhere. He looked. Finally, he handed over his briefcase to Olivia Chase. Miss Chase opened it. The Little Mermaid was resting right on top of the old newspaper. Oh my, Mr. Bendry gasped. It really is the last book in the Plum Brush set. May I examine it, Olivia? Miss Chase stepped between Mr. Bendry and the book. What do you know about the rest of the set, Ezra? Tell me right now. Mr. Bendry seemed dizzy and confused. He leaned against the counter to steady himself. The other 3 books are in the trunk of my car. Here, take my keys and get them, young man. Mr. Bendry handed the keys and said this to Henry. Henry was back in a minute with Violet's set. Here, young lady, Mr. Bendry said, handing all the books to Violet. This set is rightfully yours. I know you'll treasure it because you're a book lover, too. Violet's hands were shaking when she took the books from Mr. Bendry. How did you get the other 3? I took them last night while all of you were out. I'm sorry. I still had a set of keys Mabel gave me. Please understand, I just had to see those books once Violet said the Little Mermaid was part of a set. I don't know how I missed them at Mabel's shop during my many visits. I found them mixed in with the hobby books, Mr. Bendry, Violet explained. Now it was Mr. Phillips' turn to speak. That's just another one of Mabel's cruel jokes on me. She was always teasing me about having valuable stamps and making me hunt down clues. I'd heard stories that she even had the famous Costa Rican flag stamp. I'm more of a stamp expert than any of the writers of those worthless hobby books, so I never bothered to check that section. What made you think the stamp might be connected with the fairy tales, Rex? Miss Chase asked. Mr. Phillips' eyes looked hard and angry. It kept driving me crazy when she said stamp collecting was child's play, or that those old stories about the famous stamp were just fairy tales. Where do you come in, Sarah? Miss Chase wanted to know. Miss Post bought the flag stamp at my grandfather's for $1. $1, Sarah Deckel began. My poor grandfather didn't even know he had such a valuable stamp lying around. After he died, it was just thrown in with these old books and sold off in a yard sale. When I found an old newspaper and some family papers showing Miss Post with the stamp, well, I just had to get it back. I found out Rex knew all about stamps, so I showed him the newspaper. That's how I narrowed down my search to these books, Rex explained. We followed the Aldens all week. Sarah nearly got hold of one of the books at Jackson Square, but it looks like Mr. Bendry beat us to the rest of the set. I'm sorry, Olivia, Mr. Bendry apologized. I just had to see if you really had the entire Plum Brush set. I was hiding under the stairs in the courtyard early in the week when you told the Aldens you were going to advertise for a book expert. Only I showed up too soon, as these smart children figured out. Then Henry here caught me poking around when I thought you all were out to lunch the other day. Were you the person we saw run from the shop? We also had the feeling someone was looking around while we were sleeping, Henry said. Mr. Bendry nodded his head. I did come up the stairs while you were out to dinner. That's when I took the 3 books. But bother sleeping children? Never. That was me, Sarah Deckel confessed. I didn't mean to scare anyone. I just waited until everyone was asleep after you got back from sightseeing. Rex also had a set of Miss Post's keys. I let myself into the courtyard and came up to the sleeping porch, but of course the 3 books were already gone. I knew one of them was in Jesse's pack, but I didn't dare look for it at night. I came back in the morning, but the set was still gone, and I couldn't find Jesse's backpack. Never mind who did what with these books, Rex Phillips said. What I want to know is where's the flag stamp? Mr. Bendry picked up The Little Mermaid. He stroked the book gently, then opened to the back of the book. He ran his fingers over the end papers. No one dared to breathe. Mr. Bendry reached into his pocket and pulled out a small knife with a razor-thin blade. He put the blade under the end paper and slowly lifted it away from the cover. The glue is all dried out, he said. It's going to come right up. And so it did. When Mr. Bendry lifted the end paper, everyone gasped. There's the stamp, Rex Phillips said, barely whispering. Don't touch it. It's extremely fragile. What are you doing with that book, for heaven's sakes? Mr. Bendry handed the book, stamp and all, to Violet. It's rightfully yours, young lady. Take good care of it. Violet took the book from Mr. Bendry and offered it to Miss Chase. I want to give it back to you. You can sell the stamp and the book and buy your shop right now. Please take it back. Miss Chase put her arm around Violet. I should report Rex and Miss Deckel to the police, but they'll be more useful by helping me find out how we can sell this beautiful stamp. I may even share the money with Sarah Deckel to settle things with her family. But I want you to keep the fairy tales, Violet, the whole set. Violet smiled. Only if you'll display them at the mystery bookstore. That way I can see the books whenever we come to New Orleans. Miss Chase turned to Mr. Bendry. Ezra, I know you've returned the books, but I can't help feeling terribly let down. After all, you and I have known each other for years. I don't see how we can work together now. I really don't. Mr. Bendry looked crushed. I don't blame you, Olivia. I put my own interest ahead of everyone. Please accept my deepest apology. I wish you would give me a chance to make it up to you. Miss Chase stared at Mr. Bendry for a very long time. How could you do that, Ezra, after all that's happened? I could put together a rare book collection of mysteries for your store. That's what you could let me do, Olivia, Mr. Bendry suggested. I don't read most of the books I collect, but I do know I have quite a valuable collection of rare mysteries myself. I'd like to give them to you for sale in your mystery bookstore. May I do that, Olivia? Miss Chase took a while to answer, but when she did, she was smiling. Of course, Ezra. I know your collection would draw many mystery lovers to my new shop. Perhaps you and I can try to start over after all. Hey, what about a mystery from my collection? Benny piped up. Now, what mystery is that, young fellow? Mr. Bendry asked. Benny crinkled his forehead. Well, it's not even written yet, but it will be. It's going to be about two brothers and two sisters who hear about a missing backwards stamp hidden in some old books. But the books get stolen and everything, and the kids have to find them. What do you think? Everyone laughed, including Mr. Bendry. Now, that's one mystery I'll actually have to read. So that concludes the Boxcar Children, number 48, The Mystery Bookstore. I hope you enjoyed this book series. Come back next week and I'll have another story for you. And I hope you have a fabulous week. And remember, above all, to be kind. Thanks for joining me today. Bye.